The night my family made me homeless, it was raining. My stepfather Gerald dragged my suitcase to the front porch and shoved it hard enough to burst the zipper open. My clothes scattered across the wet concrete. A hoodie, a pair of jeans, the small framed photo of my late father I kept tucked in the front pocket. All of it soaking up cold rainwater in the dark. "Get out," Gerald said. His voice was flat and decided, like a man who had rehearsed this and was simply glad to finally get it done. I turned to my mother, Diane. I searched her face for anything, a word, a flinch, even a look of regret. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded, her expression completely still. The porch light caught the side of her face but gave nothing away. "I just turned 18, I whispered. "And now you are not our responsibility," she said. The door closed. The lock clicked. The lights went out one by one. "My name is Ariel Knox." That was the night my family decided I was a lesson, not a daughter. I did not move for a long time. The rain kept falling, thin and cold, soaking through my jacket. I kept staring at the door, still half believing it would open again. Then I noticed the light across the street. Mrs. Calloway's front window glowed warm and yellow against the dark. I had known her my whole life. She used to call me the bright one. Whenever she saw me walking home from school, I looked toward her window and felt a desperate flicker of hope. The curtain shifted. Her face appeared in the gap, just long enough for our eyes to almost meet, just long enough for me to know she had seen me standing there with a burst suitcase and nowhere to go. Then she let the curtain fall and disappeared. That single moment broke something the locked door had not. I had expected cruelty from Gerald. I had not prepared myself for a whole neighborhood full of silence. Nobody was coming. I forced my clothes back into the broken suitcase and pulled out my phone. 14% battery. I scrolled to the only name that felt safe. Tinny. We had been friends since 9th grade. She was sharp and steady and never let anyone make her feel small. I pressed call and held my breath. She picked up on the second ring. "Ariel? It is almost midnight. Are you okay?" "No." My voice cracked. "I need somewhere to go." "What happened?" "They kicked me out." A brief pause. Then, without a single question or condition, "Come now. I will leave the door open." Those two words hit harder than anything else that night. "Come now." I grabbed my suitcase and started walking. The rain soaked through my shoes by the end of the block. I did not stop. With every step, something quiet and determined began hardening inside my chest. I had no plan, no money, and no idea what came next. But I made myself one promise before I reached the end of that street. I would never be this powerless again. Tinny's apartment was tiny, one bedroom, a bathroom that smelled like coconut conditioner, a small kitchen with a drawer that never closed properly. Her couch was too short for me, so I spread a blanket on the floor and lay there in the dark listening to rain tap against the window. I could not sleep. I kept replaying my mother's face. The way she stood in that doorway with her arms folded, looking at me the way you look at a stranger who wandered onto your porch by mistake. No argument. No grief. Just that blank, decided expression, like the choice had been made long before that night. I turned the question over for hours. What had I done that was so unforgivable? I was not difficult. I did not drink, skip school, or cause trouble. I had kept my head down my whole life. None of it had been enough. Lying there on that cold floor, something shifted. I stopped asking what I had done wrong and started asking something different instead. What was I going to do next? That question felt cleaner. That question had somewhere to go. I found the waitressing job first. A small diner called Rudy's, 3 blocks from Tinny's apartment. The owner barely looked at me before handing over an apron and saying to be there by 6 in the morning. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The office cleaning job came 1 week later. A commercial building downtown that needed a crew from 8 in the evening until midnight. I signed on for 4 nights a week and squeezed community college classes into the gaps between both jobs. My days went like this. Up at 5, breakfast shift at Rudy's, textbooks open on bus rides, classes in the afternoon, cleaning offices in the evenings, homework until my eyes gave out, 5 hours of sleep, then start again. Some nights I ate peanut butter out of the jar because there was nothing else. Some nights I cried quietly on Tinny's floor after she had gone to sleep. But every single paycheck felt like something solid beneath my feet. Something real. Something that belonged to me and could not be kicked away. I was 18 and barely surviving, but I was building. There was a real reason they kicked me out. It had nothing to do with discipline. My father, Warren Knox, passed away from a sudden illness when I was 16. He had not been wealthy, but he had been careful. He left behind a modest life insurance policy, nothing enormous, but enough to change the direction of a young girl's life if it ever reached her. The policy named me as the sole beneficiary. I found the documents tucked inside an old cardboard folder in his desk drawer, almost 2 years after he died. I had never known the policy existed. When I brought the documents to Gerald and calmly asked about them, his face changed. Something cold and calculating moved behind his eyes before anger covered it over. He told me I had misread the papers. He said the money had gone toward household expenses and there was nothing left to discuss. I asked again, gently, but I asked. 2 weeks later, I was standing on the porch in the rain. It was never about teaching me anything. They removed me because I had started asking questions they could not afford to answer. I had been cleaning the offices at Hartwell Property Group for about 3 months when Mr. Hartley first spoke to me directly. He was the senior property manager, quiet, observant, always working late. Most people in that office treated me like furniture. Mr. Hartley was different. He noticed things. One evening, while wiping down the glass partition near reception, I spotted a filing error on an intake form left on the counter. The address had been entered into the wrong column, which would have caused a mismatch in the system records. I corrected it quietly and went back to cleaning. The next evening, Mr. Hartley paused at the partition and studied the form. Then he looked at me. "You fixed this," he said. "It was going to cause a problem down the line," I replied. He studied me for a moment. "You notice things other people walk right past." I did not know what to say to that. "Come see me tomorrow morning," he added, already turning back toward his office. "I might have something for you." For the first time in a long time, someone had looked at me and seen a solution rather than a problem. I showed up the next morning in the only clean blazer I owned. Mr. Hartley offered me a junior administrative position, data entry, tenant file management, invoice tracking. The pay was not much better than cleaning, but the hours were regular and the work was indoors. More importantly, I was learning. I read every lease agreement that crossed my desk. I studied how maintenance costs were broken down, how late fees were applied, and how eviction procedures worked from beginning to end. I watched how Mr. Hartley handled difficult tenants, firm but never unkind, and how he negotiated with contractors without sacrificing quality. Real estate, I began to understand, was not simply about buildings. It was about systems. It was about knowing who controlled what and when and why. It was about learning the rules well enough to eventually build something of your own within them. I studied property law in the evenings. I passed my real estate licensing exam on the second attempt. Mr. Hartley put my name forward for a promotion before my first year was done. I felt like I was finally standing on solid ground. By 23, I was managing a small cluster of residential units on my own. It was not glamorous work. I handled broken water heaters, noise complaints at 11 at night, and tenants who called my personal cell on Sunday mornings about things that could have waited until Monday. I handled every single call without complaint. What surprised me most was how authority felt. People who had never paid me attention now needed my signature before work could begin. Maintenance crews waited on my approval. Tenants addressed me as Ms. Knox without being asked. I thought about my mother often during those months. I thought about the way she had stood in that doorway, arms folded, looking at me as though I had no future worth protecting. I thought about Gerald's face when I asked about the insurance money, that cold flash behind his eyes before anger covered it over. They had decided I was nothing. And now I was making decisions that affected where people lived and how their daily lives ran. I was 23. I was just getting started. Almost 2 years passed without a single word from my mother. No birthday call. No message at Christmas. Nothing. I had been cut off as completely as if I had never existed in that household. Over time I had grown used to the silence, found a quiet kind of freedom in it. So when my phone lit up one Tuesday evening and her name appeared on the screen, I went completely still. I stared through 2 full rings before answering. Ariel. Her voice was softer than I remembered. She stretched my name out slowly, the way she used to when I was small and she wanted something from me. Mom. I kept my voice flat. I have been thinking about you, she said. Just wanted to check in. See how you have been doing. She had not called in nearly 2 years. Not on my birthday, not during the holidays, not once while I slept on floors and worked double shifts. And now, without warning, she wanted to check in. I had spent enough time in property management to recognize when someone was laying groundwork before making a real request. She had not called to ask how I was doing. She needed something. I was right. Within 5 minutes, the warmth in her voice cracked and the real reason surfaced. Gerald's business had collapsed. They were behind on their bills. They had borrowed from the wrong people, and those people wanted their money back with interest. She just needed a small loan, she said. Just enough to get through a rough patch. I sat in my apartment and listened to every word without interrupting. I let her lay out the full picture. Then I said, "No." A silence followed that felt completely different from the silences I remembered growing up in. Those silences had always had something coiled inside them, something about to snap. This one was different. This one belonged to her, not to me. "Ariel, I hope things improve for you," I said. "But I cannot help right now." I ended the call before she could respond and sat still for a long moment. That was the first time in my life I had held the power in a conversation with my mother. Did not feel like victory. Felt cleaner than that. Felt like clarity. After that call, something shifted in how I thought about my future. I had spent years building someone else's portfolio, filing paperwork under the company name, helping grow a business that belonged to other people. I was grateful for every opportunity Mr. Hartley had given me. He had changed the direction of my life. I would never forget that. But I was ready for something of my own. I saved aggressively for 2 years, cutting my expenses down to almost nothing. In the evenings I studied acquisition strategies, financing structures, and property contract law. I built quiet relationships with small investors, reliable contractors, and professionals who were hungry and careful the same way I had always been. At 25, I registered my own firm, Ariel Knox Property Management. Just me, a part-time assistant named Fola, and 3 small residential units acquired through a carefully arranged deal with a retiring landlord. Mr. Hartley shook my hand the morning I handed in my notice. "I always knew you would do this," he said quietly. "Do not lose what made you good at this work." The company was small, but it was entirely, completely mine. 3 years into running my firm, I was reviewing an acquisition list that would nearly double the size of my portfolio in a single deal. A mid-sized property group had listed several residential buildings at a reasonable price. The location suited my strategy, the buildings were well maintained, and my financing had been in place for months. I had been preparing for exactly this kind of move for a long time. I sat at my desk on a quiet Wednesday morning going through the tenant records attached to each listed property. I always reviewed existing leases before finalizing any deal. I needed to know exactly what I was inheriting before signing anything. I was halfway through the 3rd property file when I stopped. One address stood out immediately. A modest 2-bedroom unit in a neighborhood I recognized without having to think about it. I leaned closer and read the address again slowly. I knew that street. I knew that exact block. I had walked past it hundreds of times as a teenager, carrying grocery bags, moving through a life I had not yet known was about to be ripped away from me. My throat tightened. I scrolled down to the tenant information, already suspecting what I was about to see. Diane Knox. Gerald Stanton. I stared at the screen without moving for a very long time. They were renting. According to the records, they had been in that unit for 14 months. Before that, they had lived in a rental across the city, one they had been removed from after 3 straight months of missed payments. Their current file had 2 formal warnings attached to it, both issued within the past 6 months, both for the same reason. Late rent. Again and again. They were struggling badly. I pushed back from my desk and walked to the window. Outside, the city moved the way it always did, cars, noise, people going about their lives with no idea what I had just read. The afternoon light was flat and gray. 10 years ago, I had been the one standing in the rain with 14% battery and nowhere to go. I had been the one the world looked away from. Now their names were in my acquisition records. Their housing situation was connected to a decision sitting on my desk. Fate had handed me something I had not asked for, and I needed to decide very carefully what to do with it. I decided to visit the property before making any final decisions. I told myself it was routine, a standard walkthrough before the acquisition closed, which was true. But as I parked down the street and walked the rest of the way on foot, I knew routine was not the only reason I was going. The building was a simple 2-story block. Clean outside, trimmed grass, unbroken windows. I moved through the ground floor with the current property manager, checking the communal spaces and reviewing maintenance logs the way I always did. Then I turned the corner at the top of the second-floor stairwell and saw them. Gerald stood near the far end of the hallway talking to another tenant. He was thinner than I remembered, his face more lined, his collar slightly too large. My mother sat on a plastic chair just inside their open front door, a grocery bag at her feet, eyes on her phone. She had more gray in her hair than the last time I had seen her. They both looked smaller than they had lived inside my memory. I kept walking, face neutral, pace steady. Neither of them looked up. That evening I sat in my car down the street for almost 20 minutes before finally driving away. They had not recognized me. I had walked within 10 feet of Gerald. He glanced up briefly, made polite eye contact and looked right through me. Just another professional in a blazer passing through his building. No pause. No flicker. My mother had not even looked up from her phone. I had grown up in their house, eaten at their table every day for 18 years. Washed dishes in their kitchen, and neither of them had seen me. I drove home slowly, processing everything in silence. Part of me had expected that seeing them would unearth something soft, some old grief buried deep, some stubborn longing that had survived despite everything. And there was something, yes, a dull ache when I noticed my mother's gray hair, a strange sadness at how much Gerald had aged. But it was not the kind of feeling that made me want to go back. If anything, it showed me how far I had traveled since that rainy night on the porch, and it confirmed that nothing about what came next needed to be about revenge. The acquisition closed on a Friday. I signed the final papers at my attorney's office and walked out into a cool gray morning with 3 new buildings added to my portfolio, one of which now housed my mother and stepfather as tenants. I was their landlord. I did not announce it. I did not contact them directly or change anything overnight. My management team sent the standard new ownership letter to all tenants in the building. The same letter every other tenant received. It introduced the new ownership, explained the updated payment portal, and outlined the maintenance request process going forward. Professional, clear, identical for everyone. But the policies that followed were firm in ways the previous management had not been. Payment deadlines were enforced without exceptions. Late fees were applied consistently. Lease violations were documented and addressed. Nothing personal, just proper management, the kind I ran in every building I owned. Within 6 weeks of the ownership transition, red flags began appearing on their unit in the system. Late payment. Warning issued. The pressure was not something I created. It was simply the truth of their situation with no one left to look the other way. The flags kept appearing. By the 3rd month under new ownership, their account showed 2 outstanding late payments, 1 lease violation for an undisclosed subletting arrangement, and a formal noise complaint from a neighboring tenant. My management team handled every communication the same way they handled any difficult tenancy. Formal letters, documented calls, clear timelines. They did not know whose names were in that unit. They did not need to know. But I saw every flag in the system. I reviewed the notes. I read my mother's responses, defensive at first, then frustrated, then apologetic with promises that did not quite follow through. She called the management office 3 times in 2 weeks, each time asking to speak with someone in charge. Each time she was directed back through the formal process. Gerald sent a long email full of explanations and blame aimed at the building's previous management. My team responded with a single paragraph citing the specific lease clauses that had been violated. For the first time in 10 years, they were the ones being held to rules they had not written, being asked to meet deadlines they had not set. They were the ones with no control over the outcome. I found the complete truth during the property audit. Whenever I acquired a new building, I did a thorough review of all historical records. 3 weeks in, my assistant flagged an old manila folder left in the physical archive of the previous management company, a personal document that had somehow mixed in with the building's paperwork over the years. Inside was a copy of my father's life insurance policy. I sat at my desk and read through it twice without moving. Warren Knox. Policy value, $42,000. Named beneficiary, Ariel Knox, daughter. Below the policy, handwritten notes in handwriting I recognized immediately. Not my father's. Gerald's. Dates, amounts, a rough calculation across the bottom of the page, and a note that read, transferred household account 2014. The year after my father died. The year I had been 14 years old with no idea any of this existed. I had been 16 when I found the policy in my father's desk. 16 when I went to Gerald with honest questions. They had removed me from that house within 2 weeks. They had not kicked me out to teach me anything. They had kicked me out to protect what they had stolen. Every cent my father left specifically for me. They requested a meeting 2 weeks after the third formal warning. The warning had been clear. One more lease violation within 60 days would initiate the notice to vacate process. My team had sent the letter by certified mail, the way we handled every serious communication. My mother called the office 4 times after receiving it. On the 5th call, she asked to speak directly with the owner. My assistant appeared at my office door. A tenant from the Brentfield building is on the line. Her name is Diane Knox. She says she has been in the building over a year and wants to speak with you personally. I looked up from the document I had been reviewing. Schedule a meeting, I said. Friday afternoon. Here in the office. After my assistant left, I sat in silence for a long moment. Gerald and my mother had no reason to connect my company name to me. They had not recognized my face during the walkthrough. They had not connected anything at all. They were coming to appeal to a stranger for mercy. They had absolutely no idea who that stranger was going to be. I was already seated at my desk when they were shown in. I had deliberately positioned my chair so visitors sat facing the window, with the afternoon light in their eyes and a clear view of my face from the moment they entered. Gerald walked in first, wearing a collared shirt a size too large. My mother followed close behind, clutching her handbag in both hands, eyes moving quickly around the room the way people do when they are nervous about what they are walking into. Then her eyes reached my face. She stopped walking completely. The color drained out of her so fast it looked like something had been pulled from beneath her skin. Gerald took 2 more steps before he noticed she had gone still. He turned to find out why, and followed her eyes across the room to where I was sitting. His mouth opened. Neither of them said a word. I let the silence sit for several seconds. Then I gestured to the 2 chairs across from my desk. Please sit down, I said. Ariel? My mother's voice came out thin and barely formed. Yes, I said simply. 10 years of assumptions collapsed behind both their eyes in a single breath. The crying started within 2 minutes. My mother went first, hands over her face, shoulders shaking, saying my name over and over like repetition might explain something. Gerald sat rigid for a long moment before dropping his head into his hands. Then came the words. We had no choice. Things were hard back then. We always meant to tell you about the money. We thought about you all the time. We never stopped caring. I listened to every single word. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not lean forward and list every specific lie the way I had once imagined I might. I simply sat with my hands folded on the desk and let them speak until they had nothing left to say. That stillness unsettled them more than any anger could have. They had walked in expecting to find the girl they remembered. The one who stood on the porch waiting for the door to open. The one who needed something from them. That girl was gone. The person across the desk had been built slowly and deliberately in her place, across 10 years of cold floors, early mornings, and questions nobody had bothered to answer. Point 23. When the silence returned, I spoke. I have reviewed your tenancy file in full. 3 late payments. 1 documented lease violation. 1 active complaint from a neighboring tenant. Under the standard terms of your lease, the 3rd formal warning begins the notice to vacate process. Gerald's jaw tightened. So you are going to evict us? I did not say that, I replied. You have 2 options. The first is a structured repayment arrangement for the outstanding balance, combined with a compliance agreement outlining the conditions for staying in the unit. The second is a voluntary exit with a 60-day notice period, and a professional reference letter for your next housing application. My mother looked up slowly. That is it. That is it. After everything, she stopped. Started again. You are just giving us options? Yes, I said. The same way I had to find my own options at 18. I was not cruel about it. I did not want to destroy them. What I had needed for a very long time was for them to understand that choices carry weight. That the things you do to people do not dissolve because time passes or because the person you hurt eventually stops crying. Consequences do not disappear. They wait. They chose the repayment plan. In the weeks that followed, I watched the pattern play out the way it almost always does with people who have spent their lives avoiding real accountability. The first payment came on time. The second came on time. The third was partial, followed by an explanation. Then a late fee. Then another formal notice from my team. Gerald called once to complain. He described feeling treated unfairly, talked about everything they had been through, suggested reasonable people should be able to work things out informally. My team responded with one paragraph citing the exact clause he had agreed to when he signed the lease. My mother sent a handwritten letter addressed to me by name. 3 careful pages. There were things in it that might have reached me once, specific memories, pieces of the past she still held, something that read almost like a real apology in the final paragraph. I read every word. Then I filed it and responded through my team with a formal letter outlining the remaining balance and the next payment deadline. The system I had built had no space for guilt wrapped in old memories, or remorse that only arrived once consequences appeared. They had options, fair, documented, professional options, the same options any other tenant would have received. I did not destroy them. I want to be clear about that because I know what kind of ending people expect when they hear how this story begins. They expect fire. An eviction notice slid under the door, a courtroom, a final humiliation that mirrors the one I suffered at 18. But that was never what I wanted. What I wanted was simpler and harder to explain. I wanted to stop carrying them. For 10 years, even through all the silence, my parents had lived inside my head as an invisible weight. A question I could not stop turning over. A door I kept half imagining might open. I had built my entire career, in some quiet way, reaching toward something they had told me I was not worth. When I walked out of that meeting room on a Friday afternoon, I felt something leave me I had not fully known I was still holding. A few months later, they moved out of the unit voluntarily. I processed their reference letter the same way I processed every outgoing tenant's, fairly, accurately, without malice. I still think about that rainy night sometimes. I still see my mother's face in the doorway, arms folded, lights going out behind her. But the ache of it is different now. Quieter. Something I can set down when I want to. That door they slammed on me at 18 did not end my story. It was the first sentence of it.